A quiet man and his German shepherd live in the shadow of a wealthy estate, trying to stay invisible. But one evening, beneath crystal lights and polite laughter, a sound cuts through the air, a dog screaming in pain. What begins as a cruel game for the rich becomes a moment that will expose the truth, awaken courage, and test faith itself. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. Dusk settled over the estate, like thick velvet, warm and heavy. Lanterns woke one by one, music drifted across manicured hedges, and the last sunlight glazed the marble steps as if the evening had been poured from gold. The host stood in the garden, as though it belonged to him, the way air belongs to lungs. He was 60, tall in an old-school way, spine straight, shoulders squared, silver hair combed back with precise vanity. His face was sharp, high cheekbones, a long nose, thin lips that rarely softened into anything human. Years of winning had trained his expression into a permanent, practiced calm, the kind that made people laugh at jokes they didn't find funny. He owned a major company, the kind whose name sat on stadiums and charity plaques. Yet the people who worked inside his house knew a different empire, one ruled by fear, where a misplaced glass could earn a slap, and a bad day could turn into a broken rib for a servant who couldn't afford to quit. His cruelty wasn't loud all the time. That was what made it worse. It was controlled, curated like his wine cellar, because control was the only thing that still made him feel young. Tonight, he wanted proof. Proof for his guests, proof for himself, proof for the mirror that had started to show him small betrayals. A fine tremor in his hand, a slower rise from chairs, the whisper of weakness. He lifted a carved wooden bow, antique, polished, the grip darkened from years of touch, and the crowd leaned in as if the garden had become a theater. There were women in shimmering dresses and men in tailored jackets, the scent of expensive perfume layered over cut grass and cigar smoke. They watched him with bright eyes and easy smiles, the way people watch a magician, hoping to be impressed and relieved that the knife is never pointed at them. At his gesture, 2 attendants dragged in the entertainment. A retired canine, once a working dog, now reduced to a purchase, was hoisted and fastened to the center of a large practice target. The dog's coat was a tired mix of charcoal and ash, mottled with old scars that spoke of duty and danger. He looked to be around 8 or 9, muscle still present beneath the thinness, though his ribs showed from stress more than hunger. One ear had a faint notch, as if a past fight had taken a small piece and left a signature behind. His eyes were amber, but dulled at the edges, the way eyes dull when a creature learns that pleading doesn't change outcomes. Even so, he held his head as high as the ropes allowed, not because he felt brave, but because service had once taught him what dignity was. That memory clung to him like a last warm blanket. The host took his time. He knocked an arrow with the same deliberate grace someone might use to light a candle. His fingers drew the string back slowly, showing off strength, showing off steadiness. "Still got it," someone chuckled. Another voice, louder, praised his spirit. Laughter answered, and the dog flinched at the sound, the reflex of a body that had begun to associate joy with pain. The arrow flew. It struck with a wet, sickening certainty. The dog jerked hard against the ropes, a sound bursting from him that didn't belong in any garden. A raw, strangled cry that turned into a long, trembling whine. For a fraction of a second, the music seemed to hesitate, as though even the speakers were ashamed. Then the guests clapped. Some hooted. Some raised their glasses in approval. The host didn't smile wide. He didn't need to. His satisfaction was colder than that, more like a sealed envelope than an open grin. He stepped closer, eyes narrowed, studying the wound as if assessing a product. The dog's legs shook. His chest heaved, breath snagging, blood darkening his fur. He tried to twist away from the target, but the ropes held him in the center, a living bullseye. His gaze darted through the crowd, searching for a handler who wasn't there, a command that could save him, a familiar voice. He found only faces turned bright with entertainment, and he understood something in the way animals understand, not with words, but with an instant, crushing clarity. The host reached for a second arrow. He made a small show of it, turning slightly so the crowd could admire the line of his arm, the poised angle of the bow. A few people leaned forward, eager, as if this were a sporting match. The dog's whine rose again, higher, pleading now, a sound that scraped the air, like a desperate prayer. And that prayer traveled. Beyond the iron gates, beyond the trimmed hedges, beyond the marble and the lantern light, the sound slipped into the quieter street where the estate's shadow lay across smaller homes. In one of those homes, a modest rental with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered when the wind changed, a man sat alone in the dim living room. He was in his mid-30s, lean and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build earned through years of hard work rather than gym vanity. Dark hair sat short and practical, and a rough, neatly kept beard framed a jaw that looked as if it had been set too many times against bad news. His clothes were plain, faded jeans, a worn shirt, nothing that announced him. The weariness on his face wasn't just from long hours, it was the deeper tiredness of someone trying to rebuild life from the bottom, piece by piece, without a safety net. He had the quiet manners of a man who didn't waste words, not because he was cold, but because words had once been used against him, twisted, dismissed, made small. At his feet lay his dog, a black and tan German shepherd, about 5 years old, athletic and alert even in rest. His coat was glossy where the lamplight touched it, and his ears, sharp triangles, lifted at the smallest change in sound. His eyes were a clear brown, intelligent and unblinking, the kind that made people feel seen. He wasn't aggressive by nature. He was steady, protective, the type who watched first and acted only when needed. The man had found him at a shelter during a winter when everything else in his life had collapsed, and since then, the dog had become a tether back to purpose. Morning walks, simple routines, reasons to keep going. The sound from the estate reached them like a ghost, one long, broken whine. The German shepherd's head snapped up. His body stiffened, then rose in one fluid motion. He let out a bark, sharp, urgent, then another, as if calling someone to attention. He paced to the door, nails ticking against the floor, and looked back at the man with a fierce insistence that needed no translation. The man's breath caught. He listened again, and his face changed. Not into anger, not yet, but into something older and more dangerous. Recognition. A knowing that pain was unfolding nearby, and that ignoring it would be its own kind of cruelty. His hand moved to the doorknob, then hesitated, as if the past had reached up to warn him that stepping into another person's darkness always has a price. Outside, the wind carried the whine once more, fainter now, but still there, still pleading. The man stood so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. He did not ask questions. He did not pause to weigh consequences. The man moved as if the sound itself had pulled him forward by the spine, his hand already on the door, his pulse loud in his ears. Outside, the street lay half-lit, the estate's glow spilling arrogantly across quieter homes. His dog burst ahead of him, paws striking pavement in a rhythm born of urgency, not fear. The German shepherd's body was all forward motion, neck stretched, ears locked, tail low and steady. Every instinct aligned toward the place where pain had announced itself. They ran. The man's breath burned cold in his chest, muscles waking with a familiar ache he hadn't felt in years, the ache of purpose. He cut across lawns, vaulted a low fence, ignored the sting of thorns along the hedge. The dog did not hesitate, clearing obstacles with an economy that came from training and trust. Neither of them looked back. At the gate, music throbbed. Laughter rose and fell like a tide. The man slowed only long enough to push through as if he belonged there, shoulders squared, face set. He was not tall by the standards of men who built themselves with money, but there was a density to him, a compact strength that drew from discipline rather than display. His beard framed a mouth that had learned restraint. His eyes were focused, dark, the kind that didn't flinch. Years ago, a single event had hardened that look. An accident that took a family member, a verdict that never came, a lesson learned the hard way. Waiting for permission can be its own crime. He had carried that lesson quietly ever since. The garden opened before him in a blaze of lanterns and silk. At its center, the target stood like a cruel joke, ropes taut, the dog bound against it trembling. Blood darkened the fur along his side, and his breathing hitched with each shallow pull of air. The crowd had edged closer, eager for the second act. Glasses were raised, phones glinted. The host, silver-haired, immaculate, had already lifted the bow again. He stood with the assurance of someone who had never been stopped, who had confused applause with approval for so long that he no longer heard the difference. His fingers curled around the string, the arrow's tip angled toward the dog's chest, and his mouth tilted into a thin smile meant for the people watching him, not the life he was about to puncture. The man crossed the remaining distance in a blur and hit him squarely. It was not a punch. It was a shoulder-driven collision, the kind meant to break balance, not bone. The host went down hard, shoes skidding, a crystal glass shattering under his palm. The bow jerked sideways, the arrow clattering harmlessly across stone. For a beat, the garden froze. Then the German shepherd launched. The man's dog leapt with a precision that stunned even him. He caught the bow at the grip, jaws closing with a practiced clamp. The wood groaned. A sharp crack split the air, louder than the music, louder than the guests' gasps. The antique bow broke cleanly, splintering under pressure that was not rage, but control. The dog landed and backed away, bow still clenched, eyes never leaving the host. The bound dog's head lifted. His eyes, dull moments ago, flared with something like disbelief. The ropes held, but the world had shifted. Pain still throbbed, but hope had found a foothold. The host scrambled to his feet, fury replacing poise. He opened his mouth to shout for security, for attendance, for anyone. The man stepped between him and the target without raising his voice. Up close, the man's face showed its angles clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the scar near his temple that suggested a past not worth asking about, the steady calm that unnerved people who relied on intimidation. "Don't touch me," the man said. His tone was even, almost gentle, which made it sharper. "And don't touch that dog." A murmur rippled through the guests. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else shifted away, suddenly uncomfortable. "If you stop me from taking him for treatment," the man continued, eyes locked on the host's, "I will report you for animal cruelty. Tonight, with witnesses, and I won't be quiet about it." The word witnesses landed awkwardly among the crowd. A few faces blanched. A few looked away. Security hesitated. They were men in dark suits with stiff posture and practiced indifference, used to escorting out drunks and journalists. This was different. The host's authority had cracked, and in that crack, doubt seeped in. The man moved to the target and worked quickly, hand steady as he cut the ropes. He had not come prepared with tools. He tore fibers with brute patience, his dog bracing the wounded one, offering a shoulder, a low rumble of reassurance. When the last knot gave, the retired canine sagged. The man caught him, careful of the wound, murmuring nonsense syllables meant only to calm. The dog's fur was coarse under his fingers, sticky with blood, warm and alive. A woman stepped forward then, tentative but resolute. She was in her late 50s, tall and slim, her posture elegant in a way that came from decades of carrying herself through rooms that demanded it. Her hair was silver blonde, swept into a neat twist at the nape of her neck, her skin pale and finely lined. She wore a simple dress among the glitter, and her eyes, gray, observant, held something sharper than curiosity. She was a longtime staff member, known for her quiet efficiency, and for speaking rarely because she knew exactly when words mattered. Tonight, her lips pressed thin, then parted. "He needs a vet," she said, voice steady. "Now." The host rounded on her, disbelief flashing. "Get back," he snapped, the mask slipping. The man met her gaze and nodded once, gratitude passing without ceremony. She did not follow them out. She had learned when to retreat, but she watched, and that watching would matter later. They left through the same gate, the garden's sound collapsing behind them. The man half-carried the injured dog, his own dog pacing, alert, protective. The street felt suddenly colder, quieter, the music a distant thrum. He set the dog gently into the back of his old car, lining the seat with his jacket, checking the wound with quick, practiced assessment. The dog's eyes tracked him, trusting, exhausted. At the emergency clinic, fluorescent lights replaced lanterns. The veterinarian on duty, a compact woman with dark hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes sharp with fatigue and competence, took one look and ushered them through. She asked few questions, because the answers were written in blood and rope marks. She worked efficiently, cleaning, stitching, administering pain relief. The man stood back, hands clasped, his dog pressed to his leg, a quiet sentinel. "Lucky," the veterinarian said at last, removing her gloves. "If that second arrow had landed." She did not finish. She did not need to. When dawn thinned the night, the man drove home with one dog sleeping in the back and the other awake beside him, chin on the console, eyes forward. The city felt different in early light, less theatrical, more honest. He parked, carried the wounded dog inside, settled him on clean blankets. He sat on the floor until his legs went numb, listening to the rise and fall of breathing, feeling the weight of what he had done settle onto him like a coat. He did not yet know the price. He did not know how quickly the story would turn, how expertly power would bend truth. He only knew that when he closed his eyes, he could still hear the bough breaking, and that sound felt like a promise. Morning arrived without ceremony, pale light pressing through thin curtains as if it had business to finish. The man woke on the floor beside the wounded dog, his neck stiff, his clothes still smelling faintly of antiseptic and night air. The retired canine lay on clean blankets, chest rising and falling in a careful rhythm, bandages snug along his side. His eyes opened briefly when the man shifted, then closed again, trusting. The man reached out, resting his hand lightly on the dog's shoulder, grounding himself in the warmth of a living thing that had survived the dark. The phone rang at 8 sharp. Not a message, a call. He knew before he answered. The officer's voice was polite, professional, and empty of warmth. There had been a complaint, a disturbance, an allegation of assault. He was requested to come in and answer questions. The man agreed without argument. He dressed quietly, fed his own dog, checked the injured one once more, and left a note for the clinic across town in case he needed follow-up care. Routine had always steadied him. Today, it felt like armor made of paper. The station was clean and beige, designed to soothe. A woman at the desk took his name without looking up. Down the hall, an interview room waited with a metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. The officers who entered were unremarkable. Mid-40s, tidy haircuts, practiced expressions, men trained to keep their faces neutral even when their minds were not. One of them slid a tablet across the table. On it was a brief summary written in clipped phrases: private property, aggressive intrusion, physical contact with the host, theft of a security animal. "You're being accused of causing a disturbance and assaulting a private citizen," the older officer said. His voice carried the faint impatience of someone who had already heard another version. "And of taking a dog that doesn't belong to you." The man told his story. He spoke plainly. He described the bow, the target, the rope burns, the blood. He named the antique weapon and the applause that followed the first shot. He described the second arrow lifted and the moment he intervened. He did not embellish. He did not plead. He answered questions when they came and stopped when they didn't. The younger officer tapped the tablet. "We reviewed the footage from the property." The man waited. "There's nothing there," the officer continued. "No bow, no target, no injured dog. The cameras show a confrontation, raised voices, you pushing the homeowner, then you leaving with a dog." The room seemed to tilt, just slightly. The man steadied his breath. "That footage is incomplete." The older officer nodded, as if he had expected the answer. "We also spoke with guests. No one corroborates your account." "They were there," the man said more quietly now. They clapped. The officers exchanged a look that landed like a verdict. The interview ended without handcuffs and without apology. He was not charged yet, but he was warned, advised to keep distance, advised to return the animal. Outside, the air felt sharper. He stood on the steps for a moment, looking at the street, at the ordinary traffic of a morning that did not know it had chosen a side. By noon, the consequences began to arrive in envelopes. The first was from his employer, a small logistics firm that prized reliability over loyalty. The letter was thin and efficient. Pending investigation, his position was terminated. No accusations, no defense, just the suggestion that reputations matter, and that the company could not afford to be associated with controversy. The second came from his landlord, a man he had met twice in 3 years, both times brief and transactional. The notice cited a clause about disturbances and liability. He was given 30 days to vacate. The man read the words twice, then folded the paper carefully, as if neatness might turn back time. By late afternoon, a car he did not recognize pulled up outside his rental. The driver stepped out with measured steps and a briefcase that looked like it had never been scuffed. He was tall, angular, with a narrow face and neatly trimmed beard, his hair dark and combed back in a way that suggested both discipline and vanity. His suit fit perfectly. His smile did not reach his eyes. "I represent the homeowner," he said, offering a card. His voice was smooth, educated, and practiced. "We'd like to resolve this amicably." Inside, the man gestured to a chair and waited. The lawyer sat without being invited, crossing one leg with surgical precision. He spoke of misunderstandings and liabilities. He spoke of private property and public image. He spoke of the dog as an asset, a security animal unlawfully removed. He slid a document across the table requesting the dog's return within 24 hours. Failure to comply would result in a civil suit. The numbers were implied, not stated. They did not need to be. "You'll also be advised," the lawyer added, tone pleasant, "to refrain from making further allegations. There is no evidence to support them." The man looked at the paper. He thought of the camera feeds scrubbed clean, of applause turned into silence. He thought of the wounded dog sleeping on blankets, of the trust in those amber eyes. He felt the familiar pull to push back, to speak louder, to force truth into the open by strength alone. He had done that once in another life. It had not ended well. He signed nothing. "I need time," he said. The lawyer smiled again. "Of course, time is a courtesy." After the car left, the house felt smaller. His own dog paced, sensing the shift, nails clicking softly. The retired canine stirred, whined once, then settled. The man sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread before him, the afternoon light slanting across their edges. He understood now what he was up against. Not just a man with money, but a system that polished cruelty until it passed for authority. Outrage would not save the dog. Noise would be buried. He needed proof that could not be erased with a keystroke. He went to the closet and pulled down a small toolbox he hadn't opened in years. Inside were remnants of an earlier skill set: cables, adapters, a palm-sized camera he had once used to document equipment failures for insurance claims. He turned it over in his hands, considering. His mind slowed, then focused. If he could not rely on their cameras, he would bring his own. If witnesses would not speak, he would let the truth speak without them. That evening, he drove back to the clinic for a check. The veterinarian, a compact woman with steady hands and tired eyes, reported good news. The wound was clean. The dog would heal with rest. The man thanked her, his voice sincere, and paid what he could, knowing it would be tight for a while. On the way home, he passed the estate again. The gates were closed now, the lights dimmer. The garden returned to ornament rather than theater. He did not slow. He did not need to see it to remember. At home, he cooked simply and fed both dogs. His own shepherd ate first, then stepped back, allowing the retired canine to approach at his own pace. It was a small courtesy, one dog offering another a measure of dignity. The man watched, a quiet smile tugging at his mouth despite everything. Later, when the house had settled, he sat on the floor and spoke softly to the injured dog, not with commands, but with promises he hoped he could keep. He outlined a plan in his head, not the details yet, but the shape of it. He would comply on the surface. He would return what they claimed as theirs. He would bow, briefly, because bows can be deceptive. And then, when cruelty revealed itself again, as it always did, he would be ready. Outside, night gathered. Somewhere beyond the estate walls, power congratulated itself on another day intact. Inside the small rental, a man learned the cost of doing the right thing and decided, quietly, that he would pay it, on his terms. The night before the meeting, the man worked at the small kitchen table while the house slept around him. A single lamp cast a cone of light over his hands, steady and deliberate. He cleaned the lens of a palm-sized camera no larger than a coin, checked its battery twice, and threaded a slim wire through the stitching of a worn leather collar. The injured dog lay nearby on fresh blankets, breathing easier now, eyes following every movement with quiet attentiveness. His coat had begun to shine again where the blood had been washed away, though the shaved patch and neat bandage along his side marked what he had endured. He was 8, maybe 9, old enough to know pain and still willing to trust. The man spoke softly as he worked, not in commands, but in explanation, as if the dog deserved to understand the dignity of the plan. He fitted the camera into a pocket he had sewn with care, aligning the lens so it faced outward, unobstructed. The collar looked ordinary when finished, scuffed, familiar, unremarkable. That was the point. He tested the feed on his phone, watching the room tilt gently as the dog shifted his head. The image was clear. Then he turned to his own dog. The German Shepherd sat squarely, alert, a model of patience. He was 5, broad-chested and athletic, with a glossy black saddle and tan legs that carried him like springs. His eyes were warm brown, thoughtful, and he met the man's gaze without blinking. The man clipped a second device beneath his dog's collar, a small transmitter that pulsed a faint blue once before dimming. It would ping his phone the moment the other camera came alive. The shepherd accepted the weight without complaint, tail giving a slow, confident sweep. He had always been the kind of dog who took on responsibility without being asked. Morning arrived gray and quiet. The man fed both dogs, packed the documents he did not intend to sign, and drove toward the estate with the injured dog resting carefully in the back. His hand stayed loose on the wheel. He had learned that calm was a skill, not a mood. At the gates, the guard recognized the car from the night of the party and made a show of checking the name against a list. He was a broad man in his 40s with close-cropped hair and a heavy jaw, his uniform pressed, his posture rigid. His eyes flicked to the back seat and away again. The gate opened. The garden looked different by day. Without lanterns and music, it was all angles and control. Hedges trimmed to obedience, stone paths scrubbed clean of last night's spills. The host waited near the steps, immaculate as ever, silver hair perfectly in place, a pale linen jacket hanging easily from narrow shoulders. He smiled when he saw the man, the smile of someone who believes victory has already been counted. "You've come to your senses," he said, his voice smooth. He gestured to the injured dog. "I assume you've brought my property." The man inclined his head, a gesture of compliance that cost him something. He opened the back door and lifted the retired canine carefully, keeping the bandaged side protected. The dog's ears tipped back for a moment, a ripple of uncertainty passing through him, then settled. He trusted the man's hands. "I'm returning him," the man said evenly. "And I'm sorry for the trouble." The host's eyes narrowed, searching for irony. Finding none, he laughed. A short, pleased sound. "Good. That's good." His gaze slid past the man to the other shepherd standing quietly at heel. "And what's this?" The man unclipped his own dog's leash. The shepherd did not move until released, then stepped forward with measured calm, posture proud, tail low and steady. The man rested a hand briefly on his dog's head, fingers sinking into familiar fur. "A gift," he said, as an apology. "He's well trained. Strong." For a heartbeat, the host seemed surprised. Then satisfaction bloomed. He circled the shepherd, appraising him the way one might appraise a horse. "You're serious," he said. "You give me your dog?" The man nodded. He did not look at his dog again. He trusted him too much to waver. The host's laughter rang out, louder this time, drawing a few staff members closer. One was a woman in her early 60s, slender, with iron-gray hair pulled into a low bun, and hands that never stopped folding and unfolding at her waist. Her face was lined by years of careful neutrality. She had learned to watch without being seen. She watched now. "You see," the host said to no one in particular. "People come around." He leaned closer to the man, his breath scented faintly with citrus and something bitter. "You should have listened from the start." The man held his ground. "I won't be staying," he said. "I've done what you asked." "Of course," the host replied, magnanimous. "Run along." As the man turned to go, the shepherd met his eyes. There was no panic there, only readiness. The man gave the smallest nod and walked away, without looking back. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he did not slow. He passed the guard, heard the gate close behind him with a final, mechanical certainty, and kept walking until the sound was swallowed by distance. Inside the garden, the mood shifted. The host's smile thinned as soon as the man was gone. He snapped his fingers. Attendants moved. The injured dog was pulled closer to the target again, the ropes handled with a practiced roughness that made the bandage darken. The shepherd stiffened, muscles bunching, a low sound building in his chest. A hand came down, hard on his neck, forcing him into stillness. "Quiet," the host said pleasantly. "You'll have your turn." The woman with the iron-gray bun turned away then, her mouth tight. She did not leave the garden, but she did not watch either. Her hands stilled. The first blow landed without ceremony. The injured dog cried out, a sound shorter now, hoarse from the night before. The shepherd surged against his hold, teeth bared, eyes blazing. Laughter rippled again, smaller this time, edgier. The host seemed to savor the tension, the way fear sharpened attention. "Bind them," he ordered. The ropes came out, thicker than before. The shepherd fought, twisting with controlled fury, but numbers prevailed. When both dogs were tied to the target, side by side now, the symmetry pleased the host. He stepped back to admire his work, smoothing his jacket. Miles away, in the quiet of the street, the man's phone vibrated. He stopped walking. He looked down. A small blue light pulsed on the screen, steady and insistent. The camera feed opened on its own. The image wobbled, then steadied. Stone. Rope, fur, blood. The man's breath left him in a slow, controlled exhale. He stood very still, letting the moment settle into place, letting certainty replace doubt. The plan had teeth now. He did not open the live stream yet. Not yet. Timing mattered. On the screen, the host stepped into frame, lifting a bow that was not antique this time, but newer, polished, lethal. The dogs strained. The shepherd found the injured dog's shoulder with his muzzle, a brief touch of reassurance that was almost human in its tenderness. The man closed his eyes for one count, then opened them. He turned back toward the estate, his stride lengthening, resolve locking into place like a key in a door. "Now," he whispered. He did not run blindly this time. He ran with intention, the phone held steady in his left hand, the live feed framed and breathing. The streetlights blurred as he crossed them, shoes striking pavement with a rhythm that matched the beat in his chest. He opened the stream as he moved, not with a flourish, but with a quiet certainty, letting the image speak first. Stone, rope, fur, blood. The comments ignited immediately, confusion, outrage, disbelief, then multiplied, a tide that no gate could hold back. At the estate, the guard had barely raised his hand before the man slipped past him. The shepherd at heel matched his pace, head low, eyes fixed forward. They entered the garden as the host stepped back from the target. A newer bow lifted, the line of the arrow clean and deliberate. The crowd had thinned since the party night, but enough remained. Staff, a few lingering guests, men who liked to watch power perform. The injured dog sagged against the ropes, breathing shallow. The shepherd strained beside him, muscles trembling with restraint, muzzle pressed to the other dog's shoulder in a brief, wordless promise. The man did not shout. He placed himself squarely between the bow and the dogs, feet planted, shoulders open, his body a simple fact. He lifted the phone slightly so the camera caught everything. The bow, the dogs, the hands that held them. His face was calm in a way that startled even him. He had learned over years of being unheard that calm was not surrender. It was leverage. "Stop," he said. The host's eyes flicked to the phone, then dismissed it. He smiled, indulgent, as if humoring a child. Up close, his age showed more clearly. The fine lines around the eyes, the tightness at the corners of the mouth where smiles had been rationed. He was still handsome in a sharp, curated way, still convinced that rooms bent toward him. "You're trespassing again," the host said. His voice carried easily, practiced for audiences. "You have a talent for making scenes." The man did not move. The shepherd stood close at his left leg, a living anchor. Behind them, a woman stepped forward from the edge of the garden. She was called Sarah, early 60s, tall and spare, with iron-gray hair pulled into a neat bun and skin pale from years spent indoors. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, the tremor of someone who had spent a lifetime swallowing words. Her eyes, however, were steady now, fixed on the bow, "Put it down," she said, softly but clearly. The host laughed. "You're dismissed." Sarah did not step back. "People are watching," the man said. He tilted the phone just enough for the red live icon to glow. The comments rolled faster. He did not read them. He didn't need to. The host's smile thinned, then hardened into something like pride. "Good," he said. "Let them watch." He lifted the bow higher, the arrow's tip aligning with the man's chest. "I've never hidden who I am. Discipline requires examples." His words poured out then, unguarded, buoyed by the belief that confession carried no cost when spoken from a pedestal. He spoke of training, of keeping order, of servants who learned faster when pain clarified expectations. He spoke of animals as objects, as tools that responded better to fear than kindness. He spoke of the night of the party as if it were a successful experiment interrupted by an inconvenience. Each sentence stacked neatly into a tower of proof. Sarah covered her mouth. Another staff member, a young man with a shaved head and a bruise half hidden under his collar, stepped into frame, eyes wide, then steadied. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that courage could be borrowed. The shepherd growled, low and controlled. The injured dog whimpered, then stilled, eyes on the man's face. "Last chance," the host said, drawing the string. The bow creaked softly. "Move." The man did not. He raised his free hand, palm open, a universal sign that crossed languages and loyalties. He felt the point of the arrow settle against his sternum, a cold, precise pressure. He breathed through it, remembering a winter years ago when fear had tried to decide his life for him, and failed. From somewhere beyond the hedges, a sound rose that cut through the garden's curated silence. At first it was distant, easy to ignore. Then it grew, sirens, plural, converging. The host hesitated, just long enough for doubt to crack his composure. "Sir," Sarah said again, stronger now. "Put it down." The host looked around as if seeing the garden for the first time, not as a stage, but as a place where consequences could arrive. The sirens swelled. He laughed, sharp and brittle, and pulled harder on the string. The shepherd lunged, not at the host, but forward, pressing his shoulder into the man's leg, grounding him, reminding him where to stand. The man did not flinch. He kept the phone steady. The first patrol car burst through the gate, lights slicing the dusk into blue and red. Another followed. Officers spilled into the garden, voices overlapping, commands clear and practiced. The host froze, bow half drawn, caught between instinct and image. "Drop the weapon," an officer shouted. For a heartbeat, the host seemed to consider defiance. Then the calculus changed. He released the string. The arrow clattered harmlessly to stone. Hands were on him in seconds. The bow was taken. Cold metal closed around his wrists. He protested loudly now, words tumbling over one another, misunderstanding, property, lies. But the stream captured it all. The shift from authority to pleading compressed into a few seconds of unvarnished truth. Sarah stepped forward, shoulders squared. "I saw it," she said to the nearest officer. Her voice did not waver. "All of it. Not just tonight." The young man with the bruise nodded. "Me too." Another staff member found her voice, then another. Sorries poured out. Slaps for broken glasses, dogs kicked for barking, threats delivered with smiles. The garden filled with a different kind of sound, one the host had never curated. An officer cut the ropes. The shepherd sprang forward, teeth working with careful urgency. The injured dog slumped, then found his footing with help, leaning into the shepherd's solid warmth. The man knelt, hands gentle, murmuring thanks that were not prayers, but something close. Later, hours later, the garden stood empty, stripped of spectacle. The man sat on the curb with both dogs pressed against him, the shepherd alert, the injured canine resting his head against the man's knee. A detective approached, a woman in her 40s with cropped hair and a tired kindness in her eyes. She spoke plainly, asked clear questions, listened when the man answered. She glanced at the phone, still live, then nodded once. "You did the right thing," she said. "It took time for the truth to travel where it needed to go. But travel it did. The charges dissolved. The accusations collapsed under their own weight. Donations arrived in small amounts and large. notes attached from people who had watched and could not look away. A veterinarian called with an offer. A lawyer called with pro bono help. A building on the edge of town, plain, sturdy, became available. Months later, the man unlocked the door to a place that smelled of fresh paint and clean straw. He did not hang his name on the wall. He hung leashes. He set bowls in rows. He opened gates. The retired canine healed, Scar becoming a line of honor. The shepherd learned to greet newcomers with a wag that meant welcome rather than warning. Sarah visited on Saturdays, hair still neat, hands steadier now, bringing biscuits and quiet stories. Others came too, some to adopt, some to volunteer, some just to sit and listen to the sound of dogs breathing safely. In the evenings, when the light softened, the man stood at the fence and watched the yard fill with motion. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a custodian, holding a door open long enough for others to pass through. And when the dogs barked, it was no longer a cry for help. It was a greeting, a chorus of lives that had learned together what freedom sounded like. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through courage that refuses to look away, through a heart that chooses compassion when silence would be easier. If there is a lesson here, it is this: God often works through ordinary people who decide that suffering is not acceptable. When one person stands between cruelty and the innocent, light finds a way in. In our daily lives, we may not face bows and arrows, but we face moments where fear tells us to stay quiet. Choose differently. Protect the voiceless. Speak when it matters. Share this story if it moved you. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so more light can travel farther. May God bless you. Protect your